Hi, this is Lee Phillips from Robot Dreams. This video is part 2 of our 3-part series which introduces the Robby Framework. In this video, we're going to use the framework's UI to create a simple network for communicating between an Arduino card and a master control program, or MCP. In the final video, we'll walk through the process of building the MCP and using it in a simple C# program. So let's get started. Before we start actually digging into the framework, let's talk a little bit about what I'm going to show you. I've got an Arduino Mega board here with nothing attached to it except the computer that we're looking at, but it does have a little script running on it. This script is one we actually use in the robot project we're working with currently, called Antwerp. There's not really a lot to this little sketch. All it does is gets readings off of half a dozen analog pins here and sends them out in a JSON package on its serial port. One thing I do want to look at real briefly while we're here, just to kind of take note of, is this header file that we're pointing to here with this called body range sensor message.h. That's something that was actually generated by the Robby Framework, and while we're looking at our little demo here, I'll show you where that came from. Okay, so before we leave here, let me just show you what it is we're looking for. This is the output that's coming out of the Arduino card right now. You can see we have, basically it's just an integer that's running between the 250s and the 270s that's showing us the current analog voltage on that pin. Okay, that's that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the Arduino IDE, and let's open up the Robby Framework UI. Okay, this is the UI where we're going to go in and build our network with the Robby Framework. First step is we're going to add a message schema here. We're actually going to use two message schemas in our network. We'll call this first one the demo sensor command schema. And in theory, this would be a schema that we'd use to pass messages to the individual range sensors on the Arduino. So we're going to call this schema for range sensor command messages. Okay, and we're going to have two properties on this. The first one will be sensor ID, and that's going to be a small integer. You can see we can put in a valid range for the numbers on that, and we're going to say it's required, and we're going to add it in. So you can see it shows up down here now, and we've started building our schema. Now I'm going to go ahead and add one more property to it, which is going to be a string property called sensor command with a maximum length of 10 characters in the string, and we'll go ahead and make it required. We're just going to do those two properties, but I'll real quickly show you. We could also do floating point numbers and Boolean, and we can do simple arrays. We can't do arrays of arrays or arrays of objects at this point, but we can at least do strings, floating points, or integers and have arrays of them within our schema. All right, we're going to go ahead and save that. So everything we build within this user interface is generating JSON in the background. That's really what makes up a network in Robby, is JSON. It's encrypted and you can't directly edit it, but you can see it. So all of the dialogues that we're going to look at, the builder dialogues that build up the pieces to the network, I can go in and they'll have a JSON button like this, and I can go in and see the actual JSON that's being generated by it, and I can download that JSON and do whatever I want to with it, other than actually directly updating it to change how the network works. Okay. Now before we leave here, I said we were going to use two schemas. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring up the other one we're going to use. I'm not going to create it right now just to save time. But I do want to show a couple of things about it. You see, this is called the body range sensor message schema. And this is actually used on our Antwerp project also. Now, if you remember back to when we were in the Arduino IDE and I showed that little header file, well, that was created by clicking this button right here. This will, as I build a schema, I can click that button and it will actually generate .h and .cpp Arduino header files. So as soon as I build it here, I can push that button and I immediately have a model for that schema available in the Arduino IDE. Similarly, I have the same thing here that we're actually going to use in a minute to generate the C# class file. Same kind of thing. It's a simple model file that follows along with the schema. All right, so that's message schemas. So now let's go ahead and build up a channel for our little network. We're going to go into the channel builder dialog. So remember I said we were going to have two message schemas for our network. And that's because each channel always has two message schemas. You can see here we have from MCP message schemas and from device message schemas. So the names seem pretty obvious, but just to be clear, one type of messages is for messages that are coming from the MCP and heading out to the devices on the channel. And the other one is for messages coming in back from the devices and passing through the channel up to the MCP. So for the from MCP message schema, we're going to go ahead and use the little one we just built, the demo sensor command schema. And our from device schema will be the one we looked at, the body range sensor message schema. Now we're going to go ahead and give our channel a name. We're going to call it the demo sensor channel. And we're going to start dragging connectors onto the channel. So we're going to start out with a device connector that's going to be our connection down to the Arduino. And that's going to be a serial connector because we're going to use serial communications for this. And we're going to configure it. The first step is going to be to give the connector a name, which we're going to call this the demo sensor device connector. And since it's serial communication, we're going to go ahead and give it a baud rate of 115/200. And I know that it's on port number 5. Now this checkbox here, force wait for response, if we were emulating a request response pattern with this serial connector here, we could check that, and then every time it sent out a message, it would force a wait for a response to come back for that message. We're not going to do that in this case because we're just picking up those messages coming at 6 times a second off the Arduino card, or roughly 6 times a second. The other thing here, the logging enabled checkbox, we're not going to go into depth on that right now, but most connectors have one of these. And what this is it makes it so that if I check that, I can have all messages that come in from devices on that connector be logged into our temporal data storage system, which we'll have an entire video about that later on. But for right now, we're not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and save this configuration for this connector. Now notice that that's on the device side of the channel. So that's going to have messages coming back from the Arduino, coming through this connector and going up to the MCP. Now I'm going to add another connector on here called a string connector. This is the simplest of all the connectors. It really doesn't do anything but pass messages through. It's really designed only to be used on the MCP side of things, but in the most simple circumstances, the MCP is simply going to send strings to this connector, and it's going to pass them through to one or more of the device connectors on the other side of the channel. So we're going to call this one the demo sensor MCP connector. And you can see the name shows up here. Now I'm going to right click that, and I'm also going here to say which device connectors this MCP connector wants to talk to. So if I wanted to, I could have multiple device connectors over there, and I could have multiple MCP connectors, and the different MCP connectors could selectively talk to whichever devices I want them to talk to. So in this case, we've only got the one, so we're going to check that. And there we have our MCP and device connectors set up for the channel. Now, there's one more step we want to do before we finish up the channel here, and that's, you see down here at the bottom we have connected gadgets, which is another kind of connector that we have here called gadget connectors. There's only two right now, but I have about 4 more that are currently in development. This is the simplest one. This is just for showing JSON strings that are coming through a connector. The string from robot display gadget. Okay, so to configure one of these, all I do is say, okay, this is going to look at that device connector, the demo sensor device connector, and we want to display all device to MCP messages coming through it. All right, so there is our simple channel. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And before we leave here, I want to show what I talked about in the schema dialog. Here's the JSON that we generated in creating this channel. Once again, I can download that JSON. I can use it for whatever I want to use it for. I can do anything except directly update it for the channel as it's used by the framework. All right, so that's enough for the channel builder. Okay, so we've got one more step now to build up our configuration, and that is to build the actual network that we're going to use. To do that, we're going to push this button here, and we're going to go into the Robot Network Builder. This is the simplest of these things that we're going to do. There's really just 2 steps. We're going to give the network a name. We'll go ahead and call this the Robby Demo Network. And all we have to do here is find that channel that we just built, the demo sensor channel, and we're going to drag it over here onto the network, and we're going to hit save. Now, before we leave real quickly, I'll go ahead and show you again. Once again, we have the JSON that we created in the background here. And here you can see everything involved in the network is shown here, both the channel with its connectors, and down here we have the schemas. So that's that. And at this point, now we have our network that we're going to try to use here to talk to that Arduino card. So before we close down the framework UI here, we're going to test and make sure our network is actually functioning. So what I'm going to do for that, I'm going to come here on the main console, and I'm going to go find our network we just created, the Robby Demo Network. And then I'm going to push this button here, which opens what we call the testing console. Now you remember that gadget connector. This is that gadget connector, and you can see there's our data coming in from the Arduino card at around 6 times a second, as we're expecting. So that's working just fine. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close down the framework for a few minutes here while we bring up Visual Studio, and we'll talk about how to actually use this network inside of a Visual Studio project. This is the end of part 2 of our 3-part series. Thanks for watching.